Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here with my guest, Sara Zeff Geber, the author of The Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers. And Sara, your little claim to fame, I think, is that you've coined the term solo agers. Is that right?
I believe I did. Yes.
And when I was writing my own book, the Solo Ager Estate Plan, my Google research or my keyword research indicated that that is now the preferred term. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. And I'm glad to hear that because I've never actually looked it up. I just try and push the term when I can.
The alternatives I saw were, was it senior orphans, which doesn't sound great,
Mm.
and then solo seniors. And I think seniors in general is a little sort of passe, yeah?
Yeah, we're trying to get rid of that term, and it's dying hard, especially in the senior housing industry. But if you ever have looked at, well, you've looked at a lot of search terms, and interesting, senior still pops up pretty high as a search term. So
Yep, it's fighting for its life, but I think we are moving on.
yeah.
So the things I'd like to cover today, just to sort of lay the groundwork for our listeners, is really under three categories. First, we're just going to cover some ground on what are or who are solo agers. Then I want to almost make it a real estate talk and talk about all these different options of where to live as you approach that phase of your life. And you did a really good job covering that in your book. So I just want to go over some of that. And then lastly, you really do a good job of talking about social networks and the importance or what happens in the absence of a strong social network as you move into this phase of your life. So really, I think those are, for me at least, the main takeaways from, again, your excellent book.
Thank you. And that's a great way to proceed.
Cool. All right. So let's start with who are solo agers. Can you tell us how you define a solo ager?
Sure. When I originally conceived of the idea, I defined solo agers as anyone who didn't have children. My husband and I do not have kids. And about 10 years ago, I was watching a lot of my friends and colleagues and some of my clients taking care of their aging parents. They were spending a tremendous amount of time and resources flying back and forth in some cases to the other side of the country to ensure that their parents were safe and secure and had care. At one point, I said to a friend of mine who also doesn't have children, who's going to do that for us?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the answer was, as they say, crickets.
Mm-hmm.
No one. There's really no one out there for many solo agers because typically it is the adult children who take care of their aging parents when the need arises. Now, sometimes the need doesn't arise, but if it does, we have to plan ahead. And so that's where I decided that people who didn't have children and who were over 60 had needed a term just for them, and I coined solo ager. Now, in the interim, I've had a lot of feedback about that from people who are aging alone for other reasons. Maybe their kids live 9,000 miles away. Maybe they're divorced or widowed and they truly live alone. And I was pretty quickly convinced that I needed to expand the definition of solo aging or a definition of a solo ager as anyone who didn't have children or who was aging alone for a variety of reasons. So that's the new definition.
I totally agree with that expansive definition. Just from my line of work, doing the probates and wrapping up the estates of the folks who have passed on, I really am seeing that sometimes there are biological children, but sadly, some estrangement or harsh feelings where they're just not involved in their aging parents' life. So that definitely happens quite a bit.
Yeah. Yes, it does.
So you talk a little bit about how, let me put it this way. Are you seeing trends or personality traits that tend to dominate the solo ager population? Just for example, is a sort of independent streak or a freedom-loving streak, prevalent among solo agers?
Well, we have to think about how solo agers got there in the first place. And let's face it, we're mainly talking about women. women tend to be the ones who live alone later in life. I'm not sure exactly where the men live, but the statistics tend to point to men living with some family member, a brother, a sister, a cousin. They just don't tend to live alone as much as women do. And again, I can't really even pretend to be an expert on why that's the case. It just happens to be the case. So women back in the 70s had a lot of new doors opening for them. The Equal Rights Amendment was being, never did pass, but it was being highly publicized, highly touted, and a lot of universities and careers were opening their doors to women as they never had before. So for the first time, women of the baby boom generation were able to choose something other than being a wife and a mother. And many women chose that path. I'm one of them. I chose to have a career, a very serious career, and I, for one, didn't think that I could be a credible mother and a credible professional. So I chose being a professional over being a mother. And millions of women did the same thing. Now, some of them went on to change their mind a little later in life and had late life children, late 30s, early 40s. That happened. But for the most part, it was quite a change. And in fact, the incidence of childlessness in baby boomer women is almost twice what it is in all previous generations. It almost reached 20%, 19.4% by the census. So it was quite a revolution in what people were deciding to do about their lives. And it's only possible to measure women because we really can't measure how many men had children.
Right.
But there must be at least some corollary there. So you have a baby boom generation with many more solo agers than any other generation, even the ones that followed them, because people are having more children now.
That's interesting that your research and observation tells you that it's mostly women, because my anecdotal personal experience is that most of my solo ager clients tend to be men. But that may just be that might be selection bias, that they're more comfortable with a male attorney. Who knows, right?
Yes, that's possible. I do know that most of my women friends, anyway, and that's a small, a relatively small sample. We're talking 20 or 30 people, prefer to go to a woman as a financial advisor or as an attorney. So there could be some bias there, but I'm fascinated to learn that you have also encountered quite a number of male solo agers. I figured they were out there. I just don't typically hear from them.
They're typically very big characters or big personalities, they're fun clients. Okay, so I want to move us along to where to live, because I thought this whole section of your book was just fascinating. I didn't know half of these things existed. I'm from the New York City area, so I don't think all of these are available here. But I'm just really interested to learn about them. And here are the ones I'd love to cover the most. First, a little chat about aging in place, which I think is really important. And then I'd love to hear you to tell us a little bit about age-restricted communities, as well as home sharing and board and care homes. Yeah.
Sure.
So can we start with aging in place?
Sure. Thanks to AARP, we now know, in some of their surveys and research, we now believe that most people, I think they measured it at something like 82 or 84% of people over 60, anticipate aging in place, aging where they are, meaning aging in the home that they've lived in for 30 or 40 years. I honestly think a lot of that is because most people don't believe they can afford to move into any kind of senior living environment, even if they wanted to. But I don't think that that's a particularly wonderful idea for solo agers. Now, aging in place doesn't necessarily mean that you have to age in your two-story suburban home on a cul-de-sac where you don't know any of your neighbors. That is the one that I think is probably a very bad idea for solo agers because it isolates them too much. It isolates anyone I'm more in favor of people moving to some kind of an environment where they are encouraged and where the environment is sort of set up where people meet their neighbors. So aging in place can mean a lot of different things. Unfortunately, in my opinion, to most people, it means aging in the 2 or 3 story home that needs yearly maintenance and upkeep that most older people get increasingly unable to do. And it becomes more of an albatross than a sanctuary.
Something you mentioned that I thought was fascinating was that I think you wrote that solo agers tend to age in place maybe more than others because they don't have those adult children to sort of nudge them or suggest to them or do the research for them about alternatives. Yeah.
Yeah. What you find when you talk to people who run and operate senior living communities is that many of their residents are there because their adult children coerced them to get out of that 2 story family home and move somewhere safer. And that continues to be the case. So I do a lot of speaking with senior housing developers and operators to let them know that they have a lot of solo agers out there with the baby boom generation, and they're going to need to do some things to be a little bit more appealing to those solo agers so that they can attract them. Because very honestly, I think that solo agers need to be in some kind of community. And if they can afford a well-run, well-kept senior community, for many of them, it's a good choice.
So speaking of which, you start off by talking about age-restricted or retirement communities. So are these sound like free market or just regular condos or townhouses? I'm not sure, depending on the setup, but where purchasers or whenever people enter the community must be over a certain age so that they have a sort of a vibe for the community, as it were. Yeah,
that's right. And different states regulate that in different ways. I am in California, so I'm most familiar with how our state regulates it, and it's pretty strict because there can be age bias in communities that restrict in any way the age that people can move in. But there are ways that these communities have sprung up, and they're quite legal, and they exist at least all over the Southwest. And Southeast. Florida has huge numbers of them.
Sure.
And honestly, it's a very simple thing. You have to be 55 or over to own or rent in that community.
And it makes sense. I mean, the needs of a family with young children and the amenities that they would want would be totally different, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And it was thought for many years that older people wanted the peace and quiet and the relief from having children around and the kind of the noise and commotion that created. Now, with the baby boom generation moving into the elder ranks, some of that thinking is changing. And a lot of people have said, I don't want to be around just people my age. I want to have young people. I want to have middle-aged people. I want to have working people. So it's very much different strokes for different folks. And I just encourage people to think ahead about what they really want as they get older. Where do they want to live? Because there's not one universal answer for everyone. People have to make their own decision and act upon it.
So another example you gave, and by the way, choosing to be in a mixed generation or a more, free-flowing community may help with what we'll talk about later, the importance of social networks and perhaps developing intergenerational friendships. But another option you mentioned is home sharing. And I love how you just flat out say, the Golden Girls example.
Exactly, because everybody can relate to that.
Exactly.
I don't think I've ever run into one person who wasn't familiar with that show and had at least watched 1 or 2 episodes.
It was only 7 seasons. You would think it was more. It was a pretty successful show.
It was.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's a great example, the roommate type setup. Yeah. Yes.
And there are several companies that exist for the purpose of connecting people for home sharing. Silver Nest is one of those. The woman that I think of as kind of the home sharing queen is Anne-Marie Pluhar, and she wrote the book on home sharing, which you can find on her website, which I believe is just homesharing.com.
Mm.
And she has created some contracts that seem to work well for people who are entering into a home sharing agreement with people, because you do need an agreement up front about a number of things. And she has created a training program for people as well that want to do this successfully. So I'm a big fan of hers, and I'm a big fan of home sharing in generally. I think it's an excellent way for people to have a kind of a family that they have created, whether it's living with a younger person or living with somebody of their own generation. Again, it's a matter of choice, and lots of different combinations can work well.
Sure. The last option of where to live that I found interesting was the board and care homes. And I took away from that those are sort of almost run by individuals or small groups out of perhaps their own homes, almost like folks who have daycares in their home kind of thing. That was the parallel I drew. Is that accurate? Would you say?
It's a good parallel,
Yeah.
although the board and care homes are at 24/7 rather than daycare.
Right.
Board and care homes are a business, just like assisted living homes are a business, an assisted living community, or as I like to call it, I don't like to think of them as a facility, but people call them different things. The difference between an assisted living community and a board and care home is mostly about size and intimacy. I have known a number of people who, when they needed help, moved into an assisted living community, which is a larger phenomenon. Usually in an assisted living community, you have anywhere from 50 to a couple hundred people. And they found it just too institutional, too impersonal, and ended up, with the help of their adult children, moving to a board and care home where they lived and were cared for by the people that owned the home and 2 or 3 or up to 8 other people that also lived there. They became more than anything like a family. And there was continuity. They knew who was going to be there caring for them every day. They didn't encounter a new staff member once a week, right. Which unfortunately can happen in some of the assisted living communities because staffing is a challenge for them. So it's a matter of scale. There is not a lot of price difference. Board and care homes run approximately the same price as a good assisted living community. So it's a matter of preference. And generally, board and care homes cater to people that are quite frail and really quite unable to take care of themselves on their own.
Thanks, Sara. That's all for part 1 of our interview. We'll pick up part 2 of our interview in the next episode. Thanks, everyone.